So I guess this means we won't have Snape come tonight, Ginny said as she sat down on a chair near the couch. Somehow I doubt the professor cares about the curse, let alone the cure, at the moment, Harriet told her, smiling. I'm almost disappointed, she said, shaking her head. His nightly bumbling through the forest is much more amusing than hairballs and handjobs. Ginny, Hermione, and Ron both admonished. She blinked at them innocently. What Hogsmeade weekend, November 11th? Headmaster Weasley, after much urging from the professors, had cancelled all Hogsmeade weekends as punishment for the students' rebellion, which was why, on a crisp morning in November, the students, minus the Slytherins who hadn't been seen in weeks, were making their merry way to the village. There had been some question as to whether the professors would try to stop them. Hermione, however, had taken care of the issue with a platter of brownies and a few sprigs of catnip. "Are you sure she knows what to do?" Harry murmured. "Relax," Ron told him. "Luna and Ginny have been working on this for some time. She's got this. Besides, Rita isn't that bright," Hermione added. When they looked at her oddly, she sighed. "Honestly, I caught her in a jar. It took me almost 3 days to think of making the jar unbreakable. All she had to do before that point was transform. The jar would have shattered, freeing her. She admitted later that she'd never even thought of it. The boys snickered. Ginny joined them a few minutes later, out of breath, but grinning. If all is going as planned, the interview should be starting any moment. Seeing Hermione's questioning look, she nodded. Don't worry, I checked, and Luna took a bag of lemon drops with her. Nice touch, Ron said. Ginny grinned, especially since they're tainted with Hermione's special brew. Laughter rang out through the chilly air as the small group reached the outskirts of the village. The three broomsticks. Luna calmly entered the three broomsticks, and with a wave to Madame Rosmerta, walked up the stairs to the room they had previously reserved. Smiling softly, she opened the door. "Professor Dumbledore!" exclaimed Rita Skeeter. "I was so pleased to accept your offer of an exclusive interview. Now, Rita, you know I'd do anything for one of our lovely alumni," replied the fake Dumbledore. Reaching into a pocket, he withdrew a small sack and opened it. "Would you care for a lemon drop? I have them made special with my own secret recipe." Rita smiled thinly and accepted one of the tainted candies. "Please, Professor, won't you have a seat? I'm sure you'd like to be comfortable while we chat. Thank you, my dear," Dumbledore replied as he sat down. Rita pulled several sheets of parchment out and laid a standard dictaquill on top. Dumbledore had specifically requested she refrain from using her usual quick quotes quill, and she had readily agreed in order to get the interview. Pulling out another sheet, she briefly scanned the questions she wanted to ask. Then she smiled at Dumbledore and repressed an urge to giggle. "Now, Professor, I understand that you've been having some difficulties at the school this term. Something about a student rebellion." Dumbledore smiled and offered her another candy, which she absent-mindedly accepted. "There's been nothing of the sort, my dear. Oh, we had a minor problem when we first announced our policy to ban oral sex, as one would expect." Rita blinked and shook her head. "I'm sorry, but did you say you banned oral sex at the school?" "Quite," replied Dumbledore with a twinkle in his eye. "My deputy noted that Hogwarts has one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates of any of the magical schools. Naturally, I was appalled by that statistic, and we took steps to correct the situation immediately." Rita leaned forward in her seat. For some reason, she felt strangely flushed and hot. "How did your deputy react to that?" Dumbledore waved a hand. "She was fairly calm, but I've known for years that Minerva hates oral sex with either gender." Rita nodded and glanced over at her quill, making sure it was recording everything. "Professor, I have been reliably informed that Minister Fudge is most unhappy with the happenings at the school this year. In fact, there are rumors going on that you've been permanently replaced as headmaster." Dumbledore leaned back on his chair and smiled. "The good minister is upset, that much I will admit, but I have not been replaced. I've merely taken a short sabbatical in order to study sex magic of the Bernoulli tribe of upstate New York. This strange cult is world famous for their interest in phallic transfiguration." He paused and scratched at his crotch for a moment. "I fear the good minister is suffering from exhaustion and stress." The fear he has of Lord Gnardnuts is clouding his judgment. Also, I think he's not getting enough fiber in his diet. I know from personal experience that without enough fiber I tend to get somewhat cranky. I see, Rita said hesitantly. She fanned at her robes and opened the top buttons in an attempt to cool off. Professor, there are rumors going around about your potions, Professor. I've been told that he's been seen in the Forbidden Forest performing unspeakable acts. Have you any comment on that? Rita Dumbledore chided softly. Then he offered her another tainted candy, which she eagerly took. You can't fall for every rumor you hear. Why? Just the other day I heard a rumor that Professor Flitwick was selling fire whiskey to the students. Did I believe it? Of course I didn't. I know Professor Flitwick and know that every time he has sold anything to our students, he's always kicked a fair amount to the staff Christmas party fund. So you deny your potions master is running through the forest, naked, trying to have sex with unicorns? Absolutely. Severus Snape has suffered mightily at the hands of Lord Pimplebutt, but no more than any other Death Eater turned spy for my side of the war, of which there are several. Lucius Malfoy has been particularly effective in bringing us valuable information about specific Death Eaters and their crimes. No, Severus may be a bit eccentric, but no more than any of the other staff members. Severus knows not to molest the unicorns in the forest. He learned what happens in situations like that from Madame Umbridge after she participated in that center orgy. The woman still can't walk without bowed legs. Rita nodded and kicked off her shoes. Then she leaned forward and plucked the entire bag of candies from Dumbledore's hand. Speaking of Madame Umbridge, what do you think about her becoming a wanted felon? Dumbledore shook his head sadly. I'm sure it was all a big misunderstanding. Besides, we all have hobbies, you know. Why, I knew one man who went around marking his friends with a dark tattoo. Quite harmless, really. The fact that she injured a student doesn't bother you, she pressed. He waved off her concern with a benign smile. Not really. The little shit was always shoving a camera in my face. Little menace. I knew that, sooner or later. It would lead him into trouble, but I thought Colin Creevey was the one with the camera, Rita said in confusion. Dumbledore chuckled. Dennis? Colin? What difference does it make? Muggle-born all look the same to me. So, Professor, she said around a mouthful of candy, tell me about the fight you're having with Harry Potter. That boy, Dumbledore said with a bit of a huff. I have tried my best to make sure he's been properly guided since his entry into our world, and he simply refuses to listen to me anymore. It was easier in the beginning. He was nice and pliable and willing to sit on my lap any time I asked. But now, he leaned closer to Rita and whispered in a conspiratorial tone, he's discovered them. Ever since then, he just isn't interested in listening to me and absolutely refuses to play hide the broomstick. Rita blinked. Professor? She asked. He looked around the room, then hissed. Girls, right? Why, if I didn't know it would cause other problems, I'd expel the lot of them from the school. Rita blinked again, and noted that the room changed colors every time she blinked. Wait, what? You'd expel all of the girls? Of course. How can I protect Harry and his broomstick from them, if they're always throwing themselves at him? Dumbledore grimaced. And that Ginny Weasley! I'd like to pull her hair out by the roots. Not that he looks upon her as anything but a friend, but I know where her thoughts are leading her. After all, who wouldn't want Harry? Rita stared at the headmaster for a few moments before her eyes closed. She slowly slumped sideways in her chair and began to snore softly. Luna sighed. She really had let a little too much of her own personality slip out with the last part of the interview. There was still 20 minutes left on the Polyjuice potion, and she wondered what Hagrid would do if she made a pass at him in this form. With a sweep of her robes, she left the stoned, snoring reporter to sleep off the lemon drop. No doubt it would be an interesting article. Madame Malkins, later that morning, Albus Dumbledore walked into Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions and glanced around casually, something along more formal lines than his usual garish attire. A young, perky salesgirl approached him and asked if she could be of assistance. She was a bit nervous, as he was Albus Dumbledore, and Madame Malkin would skin her if she cost the shop a sale. Some time later, Dumbledore strolled out of the store, his purchases shrunk down and placed in a pocket of his robe. He left behind 2 horrified shopgirls and 1 furiously scandalized shop owner. "Don't worry, my dears," Madame Malkin told her employees. "I will be lodging a complaint with the ministry about this. Imagine a man that old pinching my bum." "At least he aimed for your bum. That dirty old man pinched my nipples," Tess said, shuddering and crossing her arms over her chest. They both looked at Leanna, who sat weeping quietly, her legs tightly crossed. "I don't think I'll ever feel clean again," she moaned. A little over an hour later, Dumbledore bolted out of the apothecary shop, ducking at the sound of a jar shattering against the door. "And don't ever come back!" a man bellowed from the shop. Glancing around, Albus nodded to himself, quite pleased, whistling and ignoring the glares and muttered slurs aimed at him. As word of his behavior had spread throughout Diagon Alley already, he made his way to the Leaky Cauldron to have a few words with Tom. He couldn't wait to get back home and share the memories with his brother. His only regret was being unable to take pictures for the gang back at Hogwarts. Late that night, the summoning. The classroom was dank and dark, with nearly 2 inches of dust covering the floor. The room, and indeed the entire wing, had gone unused for decades. Creature levitated the large box carefully into a corner. "I know the truth, Dark Lord. Thuft. Wait until they understand Master better. Then they'll know fear." Moving various pieces of furniture around, he made space for what was to come. After placing several bottles of high-energy restoration potions in front of the box, he then moved toward the door. The potion was his own creation and was a vast improvement on the human version, with a little extra something to get things going in the right direction. "Master will make the Torso's minions pay in blood." He cocked his head to the side. There might even be entrails. He cackled then and danced a quick jig. "After Master sees what I've done here, it will be Creature who stands by his side, not Dobby." Turning to face the box, he removed the bindings around it and moved quickly to the door. Once he was out of range, he lifted both hands and clapped twice. A bright glow climbed up the walls, and Creature nodded as the room was hidden from humans and Hogwarts-bound elves. Finally, he opened the door to the old classroom and vanished, returning to Grimmauld Place. The door to the refrigerator slowly swung open, and a dim yellow light emanated from the interior. A large purple tentacle extended out from the box. It flailed around for a moment before an eye at the tip opened and looked around. Spotting the potions on the floor, several more tentacles shot out and grabbed them, pulling them back into the refrigerator. A few moments later, the empty bottles shot outward to smash against the far wall. With each potion consumed, the refrigerator grew a little larger, and the light from within grew brighter. The purple tentacle remaining outside the box thickened considerably, and the eye turned a deep bloodshot red. It swiveled around, examining its new location, before spotting the open door. Staring at the door, the tentacle slowly retracted into the refrigerator. The door opened further, and the interior of the refrigerator started to pulse with a sickly purple light. Thrum. The beast called, and the noise transmitted to the very stones of Hogwarts. The summoning had begun. The gathering. They faded slowly, silently, from their locations, from trunks and book bags, from library shelves and classrooms. In all cases, they left behind their bonds. The ropes, the chains, the magical bindings, all fell away as they were freed for a greater task. They appeared in the classroom. One by one, they lay, waiting and silent for the horde to assemble. Soon, every surface of the room was covered with them, and eyes appeared on each one, red, malevolent eyes, hungry eyes, to match mouths full of teeth. At some unseen signal, the door to the refrigerator opened. Thrum. The mother from within called. chanted the books, baring their fangs. Poisonous saliva dripped from their teeth to burn holes in the floor. The monster books of monsters had assembled, and they were hungry for man-meat. The mother waved its tentacles in a complex pattern, and a series of images flashed in the air. Images of professors and Slytherins. It was teaching them how to recognize their prey. The image of Snape was repeated frequently, along with Draco Malfoy. The horde chittered and gnashed their teeth. It had been many long years since they last fed. They were hungry, and never before had they assembled in such numbers. The horde would rule this place and turn it into the hive, all for the greater glory of the mother. The mother waved its tentacles one last time, then slammed the door of the refrigerator shut. One by one, the horde vanished from the room. The hunt was on. Hogwarts the next morning. Albus Dumbledore walked up the path to Hogwarts, glad to be back. The Ministry had recalled Percy, and he had left Hogwarts, his tail figuratively tucked between his legs. He remembered Fudge's frustration earlier that morning, when the man finally admitted that his hand-picked replacements had done no better than Dumbledore when it came to controlling the students. He smiled at the memory as he pushed open the doors of his school and stepped inside the entrance hall. The pure wall of sound that met him nearly knocked him on his ass. He looked around uncomprehendingly. Students and staff alike ran this way and that, screaming and leaping about. Several students clung to staircase railings, while some seemed to cling to the very walls like oversized spiders, and one energetic youth had managed somehow to reach the great chandelier and was currently hanging on for dear life. What in the world? Albus wondered aloud. Clapping his hands over his ears, he took a step forward, then paused when something pulled at him from behind. Turning, he found a book tugging at his robe. No, on closer inspection, it was trying to eat his robe. Shaking his head, he drew his wand. Snape entered the entrance hall just in time to see Dumbledore draw his wand. Shaking his head, he drew his own and waited. "Stupefy!" Dumbledore called. His wand pointed at the book. Blinking, Albus slowly sat up and looked around. "Awake! I see," Poppy said, as she moved toward him. "The infirmary? Why?" he asked, confused. "Severus said you tried to stun one of the books. We learned very early this morning that the damn things have some sort of built-in immunity," she told him. "He managed to get you away from them, though you were slightly chewed. Books, the monster book of monsters, and not just the copies in the castle. Hagrid reckons that every copy of the book in Britain now resides at Hogwarts. The bad news is they may very well be breeding." "And the good news?" Albus asked as he swung his legs around and put his feet on the floor. Poppy snorted. "Good news? Not likely. The news just gets worse. Oh, yes, Headmaster. It would appear that not only are they breeding, but they're also trying to eat the students and staff." She shook her head. "And they're doing a damn fine job of it." Malfoy had his right gluteal muscle chewed off, and he was pumped full of venom. "His what?" Dumbledore asked, shaking his head to clear the cobwebs. She sighed. "He lost his right arse cheek." At his shocked expression, she blushed slightly. "I won't apologize. I have had a hell of a day, and it's barely begun. Students and staff alike have been chewed on and envenomed all morning. I get them healed up, and they head back out to fight. Frankly, I think we're losing this one. Not if I can help it," Dumbledore said as he stood up. "I will gather the rest of the staff, and we will form a plan to regain control. You will stay here and attend to any wounded who come in." "Yeah, good luck with that," she told him cynically as he walked toward the door. "Oh, and you might want to watch where you step out there." Gryffindor common room. Hermione was uncomfortable but was unable to shift around for fear of falling. The fireplace mantel was not really that high, but her balance was precarious, causing her acrophobia to take over. The alternative, however, was not an option. Looking around, she found herself wanting to laugh and cry at the same time. The students of Gryffindor House, those brave lions, were all perched on top of furniture, shelves, bookcases, and stair railings. Several members of the old Quidditch team were hovering on their brooms. Below them all was chaos. Books, dozens of them, moved about on the floor, an undulating wave of furry, slathering, chittering books. She looked at the stair to the dorms and shook her head. It would be a simple matter to fly everyone up. Unfortunately, As Neville had discovered earlier that morning as he came out of the showers, the dorms were as infested as the common room. She glanced at him and grimaced. The poor guy clung tightly to the stair rail, wearing nothing but a bath towel wrapped around his waist. A sudden flash of light caused several screams. Colin, Ginny, barked for her spot on a nearby bookcase. "Stop taking pictures, you little shit. You know the light excites them. But, Ginny, when will we ever see something like this again?" the boy whined. "Hagrid's next class, I should imagine," Hermione muttered. "Colin, if you're not careful, you're going to slip from the rail." "Letting go to take a picture isn't the smartest action in this situation," Harry commented, "though you would make a nice snack. While they feed on you, we might be able to get the hell out of here," Ron told him. The fireplace flared up, causing Hermione to flinch and nearly slip off the mantel. "Whoever did that? I'm going to kick you in the—" "Good morning, Headmaster," Ginny bellowed, trying to drown out Hermione's comment. Her fellow Gryffindors looked at her as though she'd lost her mind. "Ah, Miss Weasley, good morning to you. And how is Gryffindor House this morning?" the floating head of Albus Dumbledore asked. "Oh, we're just fine," Dean said, smiling at the headmaster. "We've just been discussing which first years to feed to the books." "Pardon?" the headmaster asked. "I'm not sure I heard that correctly." "Well, we figured that if we tossed enough first years down on the floor, the books will be distracted long enough for the rest of us to escape," Seamus explained. "As we've been explaining to the firsties, our house is known for bravery. As such, we're asking for volunteers before we just start chucking the little buggers down willy-nilly," Lavender added. Dumbledore frowned, not sure if the students were serious or not. "I think we can save you trouble of sacrificing your housemates," he told them. "Oh, it's no trouble," Parvati said cheerfully. "To be honest, some of the little blighters deserve it." Several first years took exception to her comment and began to complain loudly. "Be that as it may," Dumbledore interrupted, looking as stern as a floating head can look, "the reason I called was to inform you that the staff and I have come up with a plan to regain control of the school. We've managed to move most of the students who'd left their common rooms to a safe location, and I will be calling the other houses as I'm doing with yours. You are all to stay where you are. We will come to you when we are able." "Yeah, like we have a choice," Harry muttered, staring down at the books below him. "Are there any questions?" Dumbledore asked. "Yeah," Harry said. "When did you get back, and what happened to Headmaster Weasley? He was a nice guy. A little strange, but he was a nice guy. A little strange. Face, Mr. Weasley has returned to the Ministry," Dumbledore told them cheerfully. "Didn't Minister Fudge replace you due to your incompetence?" Harry asked. "I merely took a short leave of absence for personal reasons." As the students began to fire questions at him about his leave, Dumbledore raised his voice. "Enough! Stay in your common room while the staff and I deal with the books. You will be informed when it is safe to leave." With that, the fire flared once more, and Dumbledore was gone. Hermione tightened her grip on the mantel. "I wish he'd stop doing that," she muttered. "You know, I always loved flying, but hovering on a broom for several hours is chafing," Ron said to no one in particular several hours later. "All right, so we don't have carnivorous books chasing us through the halls, but how is this any better?" Hermione complained, as she held up her wet robe and scowled. Dumbledore's answer to the problem had been to flood the school floors in a foot of water. The books had drowned, true, but the castle had shook horribly for several seconds. Then a keening thrum could be heard throughout the school. No one was sure what made the sound, and that made everyone a bit nervous. They still weren't allowed out of their common rooms, as the staff was still investigating the cause of the books turning feral, and there had been that disturbing sound once they'd all died. Not that anyone listened, of course. Most of the students had left their common rooms once the books had died. "So we get a little wet," Ron said, shrugging. "You have to admit, the first years are having fun." "True," she murmured, watching a group of the younger students conjure a few more rubber ducks and set them to floating down the corridor. "Where did they learn it from?" Ginny asked. Harry, Ron, and Hermione both answered. Neville laughed. "He's enjoying himself, isn't he? And it's about time," Ron said, grinning. As they got closer to the great hall, they could hear music playing and children laughing. Looking at each other questioningly, they began to walk quicker, splashing their way to the hall. They found the doors to the hall closed. Unsure of what they'd find, Ron and Neville opened them carefully, and they gaped at what they saw. The house and staff tables had been removed, but the room was crowded with students, ice skating students. Harry leaned against the far wall, watching. A grin spread across his face. Ron, Ginny, Neville, and Hermione did their best to make their way through the skating students to reach Harry's side. "Nice work," Neville commented, then slipped and grabbed Ron. They both crashed to the ground, tangled together and grumbling. Harry shook his head. "Why didn't you guys just transfigure your shoes to skates?" "Didn't think of it," Ron muttered as he tried to climb to his feet. "Wouldn't do me any good," Neville said, then grunted as he hit the ground again. "I can't skate," Harry grinned. "Neither can I, Nev. That's why I added spikes to my shoes." He lifted one shoe and showed them the metal spikes embedded in the soles. After sorting everyone out, Ginny and Ron went skating, while Hermione and Neville stood with Harry, no longer having problems with the ice. "Maybe we should turn all the water to ice," Hermione said. "It would be better than wet robes. The smell of all that wet fabric is getting a bit pungent. But why ruin the fun the younger kids are having? They don't mind the wet at all," Harry told her. "Nice job with the ducks," Neville told him. "Thanks. It's driving Dumbledore nuts. He thought they were cute at first. He found his office quickly stuffed with the squeaky toys. And how did that happen?" Hermione asked. "I have no idea," Harry said, his eyes gleaming. "What is going on in here?" A voice they all knew bellowed. "You brats were told to stay in your common rooms." Most of the students ignored the newcomer, but a few stopped skating to watch. Snape looked around the hall and, spotting Harry, charged across the room, only to slip on the ice and skid the rest of the way on his ass. Harry wasn't concerned as the professor careened across the hall, as he was sure the wall would stop him. The grunt he heard at impact was rather satisfying. "P. Potter," Snape stuttered as he tried, unsuccessfully, to climb to his feet. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Well, I was watching the kids skate. But I have to say, watching you fall on your ass over and over is much more entertaining," Harry said, smiling as the man fell once more. "It would seem the other students agree with you, Harry," Hermione said with a laugh. Snape looked around and his face flamed in embarrassment. The students had stopped skating and were now watching the formerly feared potions professor flounder around on the ice. Many were laughing outright. Before the professor could act, Harry drew his wand and stunned him. Turning slightly, he flicked his wand at the hall doors, and they slammed shut and locked. "All right, students, gather round," Harry called. "What are you doing?" Hermione asked him as the students skated over. "Teaching, of course. This is a school, you know." Once the students had gathered around, Harry began his lecture. "What we're going to learn today, class, is the Obliviate spell. We have a willing subject here at our feet, and we shall practice until we have mastered it," he told them. Neville looked down at the unconscious professor. "Willing? Do you see him complaining?" Harry asked. Looking around, he grew serious. "Now, the one thing we cannot touch is his memory of potions. If we remove that ability, there will be no reason for Dumbledore to keep him on staff. Also, please don't remove his ability to remember how to breathe." "And why would either of those be a problem?" Ginny asked. Ron shook his head at his sister. "Think, Ginny. Who else are we going to use as a test subject in the future if he's forced to leave the school or dies?" "Oh, right. Didn't think of that." "So, everyone watch closely. The Obliviate spell is cast like this. Pay particular attention to my wand movements," Harry told them before turning to Snape. What followed was a pleasant 10 minutes of students swishing and flicking their wands at the hated professor, who remained oblivious to it all. Gryffindor common room later that evening. Lavender entered the common room and grinned as her housemates looked at her expectantly. "Now, how did I know you'd all be waiting for me?" she asked. "Because we sent you off to gather information," Colin asked, practically bouncing on his toes. "So what did you find out?" Moving to a chair near the fireplace, she sat down and waited for everyone to move closer. "Well, Snape did end up in the infirmary. He was still there when I walked in, and Dumbledore was yelling at him," she told them seriously. "Yelling?" Parvati asked. "Well, it seems that our good professor has forgotten the headmaster's name. He keeps calling him Professor Buttfucker, and I have to say he makes it sound quite natural." She looked at them wide-eyed for a moment, then began to laugh. Harry cocked his head. "I wonder who thought of that one?" he asked, looking around at those gathered. "That would be me," Ginny told him quietly. Ron, Neville, Hermione, and Harry stared at her, astonished. "What?" she asked, squirming slightly. "They both deserve it," she scowled when they wouldn't stop staring at her. "What did you guys do?" Hermione shrugged. "Our favorite professor no longer remembers how to take house points." "Well, that's a waste of a good obliviate, isn't it?" With his stutter, the hourglasses haven't been able to remove points. "Yeah, well, I was pressed for time," Hermione muttered. "What did you do, Neville?" Harry asked, curious. He shrugged. "Assuming Hogwarts is still open next year, the professor won't be looming over me in class any longer." "Ah, I should have guessed that one." Harry turned to Ron. "And let's just say that Snape's going to have to go through potty training all over again." "God, Ron! Having him spit on us all the time isn't enough. Now we get to deal with his—" Hermione shuddered at the thought. "Brilliant," Neville said, laughing. "The twins would be proud," Ginny added. Laughing, Ron turned to Harry. "So, what did you do to him?" "I played clean-up, of course." When they stared him uncomprehendingly, he shrugged. "I removed his memories of entering the Great Hall this afternoon. He doesn't remember seeing the students ice skating or anything that happened afterward. Lavender joined them a few minutes later. You don't think anyone removed his memory of trying to find the cure for his curse, do you?" she asked the group. They looked at each other speculatively. "I wouldn't think so," Neville finally said. "That would actually be helping him, wouldn't it?" "True," Harry agreed. "We'll keep checking Snape. Calm, just in case. What excuse did you give Madame Pomfrey for going to see her?" Ginny asked Lavender. "I told her I needed a potion for my menstrual cramps." The boys looked at her, horrified. "What?" she asked. "It's perfectly natural. I don't want to hear about this," Ron said, plugging his ears. "Don't you love how he's matured this year?" Hermione asked no one in particular. "I hadn't noticed you talking to us about menstrual cramps or how your flow was going this month," Harry said sarcastically. She turned to him, wide-eyed. "I didn't know you were so interested in female menstruation. But since you asked, I'm regular, and my flow is generally light, with little cramping." He blanched. "Right. Forget I said anything." In the boys' dorm later that night, Harry closed the curtains around his bed, cast a privacy charm, then took a deep breath. "Dobby, creature!" he called. Both house elves appeared a moment later, standing on the bed. "Master called?" they both asked, then glared at each other. "Don't start," Harry warned them. "And yes, I did call. I want to know which one of you is responsible for the books," Bobby asked, puzzled. Creature looked down at his toes and said nothing. "Right, that answers the question, doesn't it?" He glared at Creature. "Care to explain?" The house elf looked up him, his expression fierce. Creature couldn't let Dobby win. Win! Dobby got Master's broom back. Dobby sunk the Hogwarts boats. Dobby chained up the nasty Toad Woman. Dobby was winning, so Creature had to prove that he's better than Dobby. The old elf snarled and glared at his foe. "By turning a bunch of carnivorous books loose on the school?" Harry asked incredulously. Creature shrugged. "It worked, didn't it?" "Did Creature never think that maybe Harry Potter was in danger from the books?" Dobby asked, rather smug. Creature expression was blank for a moment before turning sly. "Creature, unlike Dobby, has faith in the Master's ability to protect himself." Dobby spun and launched himself at Creature. So quick, Harry had no time to react. Tackling the old house elf, Dobby proceeded to pummel his rival, though Creature seemed to be giving as good as he got. "The next elf to throw a punch will be dismissed from service," Harry bellowed. Both elves froze. "Better! Dobby, get off Creature, and both of you stand up." As they scrambled to obey, he wondered if Madame Pomfrey would give him a potion for the headache he felt coming on. "Creature, what did you do to make the books attack?" Harry asked. The elf frowned. "They are not books." "Of course they are. Hagrid uses them for his." He broke off as the elf shook his head. "Master is wrong. What Master thinks of as books are actually magical creatures. They're alive." Creature nodded. "Many, many years ago, before magical protection spells were created, wizards used the creatures to protect valuable items. Sometime later, a wizard discovered he could force the creatures to change shape and used them to protect his manuscripts and family grimoire. It worked so well, he went into business binding valuable books for others. That business is still around today. So, the Monster Book of Monsters was actually alive," Harry mused. "No, just the bindings," Creature corrected. "The pages were just parchment. And the whole thing about stroking the spine of the book, That was to signal to the creature that the person doing the stroking was the rightful owner. Right, Harry murmured thoughtfully. So, how did they get loose? Creature tugged at one ear and looked at him apprehensively. You're not in trouble, Harry told him quietly. Actually, your timing couldn't have been better. Dumbledore came back to the castle to find it infested with man-eating books. I know, Creature said smugly. How did you? Harry began, then shook his head. No, I don't want to know. Now, tell me how the books got loose. Creature has been busy for several weeks, brewing potions, the elf told him. And stinking up the house, Dobby muttered. Then Dobby should have stayed out of the cellar. Enough! Harry snapped at the therm. I'd like to get to the end of the story sometime before the sun rises. Creature turned back to him and shrugged. The creatures have a hive mind. What one knows, all know. I used the first potion on one creature to imprint the knowledge of how to remove its bonds. It taught the others, and the second potion, Harry asked, almost afraid of the answer. That one creature used on the Bundyman in the refrigerator. Bundyman? Harry asked. Wait, isn't that some sort of fungus? That's what it started out as, Creature confirmed. But the people who stayed in the house before Master kept many things in the refrigerator. Strange, noxious things that the Bundyman ate. Absorbed, Creature isn't sure how that worked. He only knows that the Bundyman grew and became something else. A fungus with tentacles. The elf grinned. Something like that. The second potion increased its intelligence and made it able to communicate with the book creatures, but Creature only fed the potion to it after he moved it. Moved it? Harry asked. Where? Creature is getting to that part, the old elf told him. Master will ruin Creature's story if he keeps interrupting. He blinked. Right. Carry on then. Creature then moved the refrigerator to an old, unused room in Hogwarts. Then Creature cast a ward to keep humans and house elves away. Once that was done, Creature put the potion bottles on the floor, opened the door to the Bundyman's home, and left, since Master says the books were loose, trying to eat people. Creature knows his plan worked. The Bundyman, thanks to Creature's potion, was able to communicate with the hive mind, call them forth and direct them. And then Dumbledore killed them all, Harry said, a bit shocked. Creature, please tell me that your little stunt didn't cause the extinction of interrupted, looking offended. Creature wouldn't do that. Creature couldn't do that, as they breed like rabbits, he thought for a moment. They might be hard to find in Britain for a few years, though. Yeah, I'm definitely going to need that headache potion, Harry muttered, rubbing his temples. Where is the Bundyman now? It's safe. No one will find it, and it can't cross Creature's ward. He then looked at Dobby. Top that, he said smugly. Dobby scowled. Once I finish collecting Harry Potter's harem, Creature won't stand a chance. Harem? What the hell are you talking about? Harry exclaimed. Dobby is making a list of all eligible pretty girls for inclusion in Harry Potter's harem, Dobby said, a little put out that his surprise gift was now known. No, I forbid it, Dobby. There will be no harem, Harry told him firmly. While I appreciate the gesture, I have a bit too much going on right now to worry about a girlfriend, let alone many girlfriends. He looked between the elves, who were glaring at each other, and rubbed his face tiredly. What is it with you two, anyway? Why do you seem to be competing with each other? Because we are, Dobby said, staring at Harry strangely. Over what? Head elf, Creature, and Dobby said, then glared at each other again. I really wish you two would give full explanations, Harry told them tiredly. Head of what, exactly? Head house elf for the Black family, Creature said. Or the Potter family, Dobby added, a bit puzzled. Harry Potter is head of both families now, and the Potter family has no elves left. Everything the two of you have done so far is because you're competing to be the head elf of the family? Harry asked, a bit incredulous. The elves looked at each other for a long moment. Well, yes, Creature said slowly, and because Dobby and Creature were having fun, Dobby added truthfully. Harry sighed and leaned back against the headboard of the bed. You've both caused as much chores around here as I have this year, he told them. And while it's worked out so far, I think we need to solve this issue before one of you blows up the castle with all of us still in it. Both elves looked highly offended, but wisely remained silent. Sitting up, he looked at Creature. Blacks forever! So you're officially the head elf for the Black family. Creature let out a cheer, but before he could turn to Dobby to rub it in, Harry held up a hand. I'm not done, he said. Turning to Dobby, he smiled at the dejected elf. "I find myself the head of 2 families. As such, you will be the head elf for the Potter family." Dobby grinned. Dobby always knew Harry Potter was wise. But grim old Creature began, looking confused. "It is both Black and Potter," Harry said firmly. Creature looked at each other for a few moments before Creature finally shrugged. "It works," Dobby agreed. "You will both treat each other with respect, or you will answer to me," Harry told them. "If there are any problems between the 2 of you, they will be brought to me." "Is that understood?" When the elves nodded, he asked about his house guest. Creature cackled for a moment. "Creature thinks that Master's house guest is wishing he had recruited the redheads to his cause. Through them he has learned what true evil is." "Evil?" Harry asked, growing alarmed. "Harry Potter has seen and experienced some of their products," Dobby reminded him. "They are mostly harmless, but Harry Potter's house guest does not like knowing he is ensuring the safety of such frivolous prank. He reminds the twins several times a day that he is the Dark Lord and is to be feared." "And what do the twins say to that?" Harry asked, then almost regretted it. Dobby tilted his head slightly. "They start singing a song, sir, and marching around. Dobby doesn't know its name, but it drives the Dark One crazy." "This is the song that never ends," Creature suddenly belted out. "Yes, it goes on and on, my friend." "Stop!" Harry shouted, covering his ears. "God, I know that song. My cousin used to sing it all the time when we were little. It was the only thing he ever memorized." He shuddered. Creature grinned. "Will there be anything else, Master?" "Yes, no, ah. It's stuck in my head now." He waved them away. "Go home and behave yourselves." The next morning, Harry did his best to avoid Hermione. He knew she was upset, but didn't realize just how bad it was until she found him in the library. He saw her enter and tried to slip into the stacks, but she cornered him near the restricted section. "I hate you with a fiery passion right now," she growled as she advanced on him. Hi, Hermione," he said, trying to slip around her. "I'm rather busy at the moment and really need—" She grabbed him by the robe and yanked him to a stop. "Hufflepuff says you're the one who started it, Potter." "Well, that might be the case. I've started a lot of things this year, but unless you're a little more specific, I don't see how I can help you." She leaned in until their noses were nearly touching. "Admit it. You went around to some of the first years and taught them that damn song." "Song? What song would that be?" "Maybe if you sang a bit of it I could." She shoved him away and grabbed her head. "Damn you, Harry, I can't get it out of my head." "Every first year, and even some of the older students are walking around singing it. Hell, McGonagall was humming it when I passed her on my way to lunch." "Do you have any idea?" As she seemed to understand the problem, Harry felt he wasn't needed and slipped out of the library. A special issue of the Daily Prophet had been delivered at lunch, and the great hall was silent as both students and staff avidly read Headmaster Albus Dumbledore's exclusive interview. Even the Slytherins, who rarely left their common room these days, were sitting at their table, engrossed in the article. While the students enjoyed the read, the staff would have liked nothing more than to throw down their copies in disgust. However, it was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. One wants to look away, but can't. Harry looked up at the head table and nearly laughed out loud. Dumbledore was holding his head in his hands as Minerva shook the paper at him and looked to be yelling. Since he couldn't hear what she was saying, he could only assume she'd placed a privacy charm around the 2 of them. Snape was glaring at him as well. The fact that the press had announced his visit to the Forbidden Forest and put the most perverted spin on his little jaunts as possible made him furious. Glancing down at the paper once more, Harry scowled, then stood up. "I must protest," he began loudly, drawing the attention of both students and staff. "What are we protesting this time?" Hannah asked from the Hufflepuff table. "It says here that the headmaster has banned oral sex at Hogwarts. I find that appalling." He jumped to the top of the table and turned a slow circle, looking at the students. "I don't know about the rest of you, but I demand oral sex." Luna stood up and smiled whimsically at him. "All you had to do was ask, Harry." Several young women nodded in agreement. "You're not his type," Malfoy drawled from the Slytherin table. "According to Dumbledore, Harry's into old men." Ron raised an eyebrow and looked at Blaise. You still allow him to speak, Zabini shrugged. He's learning impaired, but we keep trying. He'd barely finished speaking when 3/4 of the Slytherin students turned on Malfoy, wands drawn. Snape rolled his eyes as spells flew at the Malfoy heir. Not again. Standing, he made his way to his house's table and picked up the unconscious blonde, then looked at his students. "While I am happy to see you out of your common room, I would ask that you not embarrass me or our house like this again. Your spell work is atrocious, and your choice of hexes and jinxes was juvenile. We'll be sure to practice once Malfoy is recovered. Davis promised." "Do!" Snape drawled, eyeing them for a moment before toting Malfoy to the infirmary. Harry climbed off the table and sat down. "Who let them out of their common room?" he asked. Ron shrugged. "There's only so much Malfoy torturing one can do before growing bored. I think this was a sort of test run to see if the little menace had learned anything yet. Seems he needs a few more lessons," Dean said, as he watched Snape disappear out the door. "The Slytherins will take care of it," Ginny told him. "They're not so bad now." Lavender laughed. "Sand fleas and a bout of puking will teach even the dimmest people to mind their manners, really?" Seamus asked. "Then how do you explain Malfoy?" She raised an eyebrow. "Inbreeding," she told him seriously. "Ah," he said, nodding. Several people glanced up when a snowy owl flew in. The owl landed on the table in front of Harry and barked softly. Harry took the letter from her, then pulled a live mouse from his pocket and handed it to his familiar. When the bird tore into the mouse, Hermione paled. "Harry," she said, her voice quavering. "Harry, must you give Hedwig live treats? Can't you give her bacon or a slice of ham instead?" Harry looked up from the letter he'd been reading and shook his head. "She's a bird of prey. Bacon and ham aren't part of her normal diet unless snowy owls have started taking down pigs. Mice, on the other hand, are part of her natural diet, and she loves them. If I gave her table scraps and whatnot all the time, I'd make her sick." Hedwig glared at Hermione, mouse guts hanging from her beak. Hermione swallowed uncomfortably and pushed her plate away. Ron nodded. "That's right. I feed pig grasshoppers all the time. Right better than owl treats." He turned to look at Harry. "Anything important?" he asked, nodding toward the letter. "Oh, this!" he asked, grinning. "It seems the twins have been playing with the pillowcase full of Dumbledore hair." Hermione buried her face in her hands. "Oh, Lord help us! What did they do?" Harry opened his mouth to reply, but was interrupted when the doors of the great hall banged open. Minister Fudge stood in the doorway with a young girl, Madame Amelia Bones, and 4 auras, including Shacklebolt and Tonks. "That's him!" screamed the girl, who couldn't be older than 20. "He's the one, the bleeding pervert. He told me I had the prettiest nipples he'd ever seen and offered me 20 galleons to play with them. The silence that followed was absolute." Heads quickly swiveled towards the headmaster. "You cad!" Hufflepuff Charity Duncan, Sister of Verity, shouted. "You told me my nipples were the prettiest, but you didn't offer me any money." She then collapsed onto her seat and sobbed loudly, thanks in part to a Weasley wizarding weed. Hufflepuff, ever the loyal house, rallied around their own and glared daggers at the perverted headmaster. "How would Dumbledore know?" asked Neville in confusion. "It's a special charm on his glasses," answered Colin. "I've been saving up for months for a camera lens that will do the same thing. I asked the headmaster about the charm once, but he refused to share it with me. Fudge practically ran up the aisle to the head table. It would have been impressive had he not been puffing like a bellows. Ron's tripping hex didn't help the minister's image much, as the man fell and skidded the last 6 feet. Fudge bounced to his feet and glared around the room ominously. "Who did that?" he yelled. Shacklebolt coughed and Fudge glanced over at him sourly, then nodded. He had more important matters to attend to. "Dumbledore," he said, turning to the still stunned headmaster, "we've had a number of complaints about you, and I'm afraid we have no choice. You need to come with us. We have a number of questions to ask you." "But I've done nothing wrong," exclaimed Dumbledore, standing and looking at Cornelius with righteous indignation. Charity sobbed louder, and the young woman next to Tonks began to weep. "Headmaster," said Amelia Bones, "these 2 women represent only some of the complaints we've received this morning. Amongst them was a message we received from Gringotts, claiming that you demanded a goblin maiden, or you'd make the Wizengamot declare war on them. Madame Malkin says you molested her and both her shop girls, and we even have a complaint from the Muggle Prime Minister, who says that you flashed the Queen and was seen by millions because it was on Muggle television. I saw the instant replay with microscopic close-up. It was you. Microscopic close-up, Seamus asked, then shuddered. If Madame Bones saw the close-up and was sure it was Dumbledore, wouldn't that mean that she had seen his— "Don't!" Hermione cried as she put her hands to her ears. "I don't want to hear this." The Gryffindors looked ill as they stared between the headmaster and the head of the Dumbledore. "Pervert!" yelled a voice from the Ravenclaw table. The Hufflepuff table growled in anger, and even Professor Sprout looked as though she'd like to introduce the headmaster to her trowel. "I never did any such thing," protested Dumbledore. "Dawlish!" snapped Fudge. The Auror stepped forward, holding a pair of magic-suppressing manacles. "Fawkes!" shouted Dumbledore. A bright ball of flame appeared over the head table, only to be met by a pink beam from the Gryffindor table. Fawkes materialized, squawked a few times, then grabbed hold of Professor Snape and vanished. "I knew it would work!" Hermione exclaimed. "What?" Hermione exclaimed. "What?" "Hermione, what did you do?" Harry demanded. Noting that everyone was staring at her, she shrugged. "He escaped the Aurors last year because of his phoenix." "Really? He has no faith in our criminal justice system? I mean, it's not like someone would prevent him from having a fair trial," she replied with a straight face. Many in the room began to snicker, though the official types began to look uncomfortable. "Anyway," she continued, "I wondered how you could prevent a phoenix from aiding an escaping criminal, and so I tried a Confundus charm." "Well done, Miss Granger," called the minister. By now, Dawlish had slapped the manacles on Dumbledore, who was still staring at Hermione in shock. "Your quick actions have helped us greatly, and I intend to put you in for an Order of Merlin." He paused, staring at her, considering. "Fourth class, junior edition," he added finally. "Wait!" shouted Dumbledore when Dawlish started to pull on his chains. "Harry, I know you're behind this somehow. Tell them the truth." Harry looked at the headmaster. "Me? I'm too busy exploring origami aliens, headmaster. I don't have any time to get involved in your troubles. I've got enough of my own. Do you know how difficult origami is?" Dumbledore whined. Harry stood and shook his head. "I understand. I really do. You've finally been caught, and now the world will know of your crimes. I will pray for you, headmaster. In fact, we will all pray for you." He paused and looked around the room, then nodded in satisfaction as many people bowed their heads. "Oh, mighty Ominoka, king of the Origama Llamas," he said, throwing his arms wide. "Have mercy on this poor wretched pervert. Teach him the error of his ways, so that he may once more be a just and righteous man. Cure him of his pedophilia, his unwholesome interest in bestiality, and his nasty addiction to pinching women's nipples. Pray." "Amen." As he finished his prayer, he noted that Madame Bones had been taking notes, and nearly laughed out loud. It seemed as though the woman might have many more questions for the troubled headmaster than she had originally thought. For the second time that morning, Harry climbed up on the table and began to shuffle his feet and chant. A few moments later, Luna climbed on top of the Ravenclaw table and began to copy his movement. Then the Patil twins, Lavender and Seamus, joined in. A minute or so later, everyone except the first years and the Slytherins were dancing on the tables. "What are we dancing for this time, mate?" Harry glanced at the ceiling. "Snow," he said firmly. "It's too late in the season for rain." McGonagall blanched and looked at the ceiling where the skies began to darken. As Dumbledore was led from the hall, he passed Harry, who was shuffling with Lavender. He bent down and grinned at the old man. "I did warn you, if you'll remember." "You should have expelled me," he said, before turning back to his dance partner. Once lunch was over, the trio left the great hall and headed for their common room. Harry hadn't managed to make it snow in the hall, but it was a tad foggy, much to McGonagall's annoyance. "Harry!" The three friends stopped and turned around to watch Tonks walk toward them. "What can I do for you, Aurora Tonks?" Harry asked politely. She looked startled for a moment, then laughed nervously. "Sorry, I forgot about the uniform. This isn't anything official. I just wanted to speak with you for a moment." She glanced at Ron and Hermione. "Alone, if that's all right with you." He shrugged. All right. He took several steps away from his friends and waited for Tonks to join him. Once she had, he cast a privacy charm and looked at her curiously. "What's up?" "It's about Remus," she began. "Is he okay?" Harry asked, concerned. "No, I mean, yes, he's fine." It's just—" She paused, then blew out a frustrated breath. "Look, I have feelings for Remus, and we were beginning to grow close until you pulled your little stunt at headquarters this past summer. Since then, he's been cold and distant toward me, and I don't understand why. Are you still a member of the Order?" he asked. She rolled her eyes. "He asked me the same question after he saw you off on the express. The answer is yes, though I don't see what that has to do with anything." Harry pointed a finger at her. "And that, if I had to guess, is exactly why he's being cold toward you." "What does my being a member of the Order have to do with this?" she asked, frustrated. He looked at her for a moment, incredulous. "You're serious, aren't you? You really can't see it?" He shook his head. "I don't have time to explain everything now, so I'll make this short. Disregarding everything he's done to me, everything he did to Sirius, leaves just one issue for you to think about." He tilted his head and looked into her eyes. "You're an Aurora. You took an oath." "Do you believe in that oath?" Her back stiffened and she glared at him. "Yes, of course I do. And what are your thoughts when you try to arrest someone for breaking a law, and they resist or try to escape?" She scowled. "That they're guilty, though that's ultimately for a court to decide." He nodded. "So explain to me why Dumbledore tried to escape this afternoon when he was placed under arrest. Are those the actions of an innocent man?" She gaped at him. "You don't honestly think that Dumbledore is guilty, do you?" He stared at her for a moment, then shook his head. "You, or Tonks, are a lost cause, and I think that's what Remus sees when he looks at you," he told her softly. "Whatever your feelings are for him, my guess is he'll never return them until you wake up to what's really going on in the world around you. And maybe not even then." With a flick of his wand, he dropped the privacy charm and walked back to his friends, leaving her to stare after him, confused and feeling very much alone. Hogwarts, November 15th afternoon. Albus Dumbledore trudged up the road to Hogwarts, dishevelled and twitching slightly. He'd been released from ministry custody an hour ago, but had yet to recover from his treatment. He'd been locked in a holding cell for what felt like weeks. He'd been given food and water, but hadn't seen or spoken to anyone until they'd dragged him out his cell several hours ago. They'd stripped him, hosed him down with water, tossed him a robe, and forced him to sit in an uncomfortable wooden chair with a light shining in his eyes. When he'd demanded to be released, the chair had sent a painful shock through his body. The action was repeated when he'd demanded to see Amelia Bones. He quickly learned to keep his mouth shut and speak only when spoken to. When the interrogation was over, he'd been yanked to his feet by unseen hands, and a magical body cavity search had been performed on his person. The idea had always intrigued him, he admitted to himself, but only so far as being the one to perform the search, not the one subject to it. The memory made his sphincter spasm, and he moaned, mostly in protest. He entered the school and stopped for a moment, listening. Hearing only the voices and laughter of the students, he turned and made his way to his office, feeling every one of his many years weighing him down. When he reached his office, he pushed the door open to find Minerva seated behind his desk, spinning in his chair and loudly humming Scotland the Bravey. He cleared his throat noisily, but she didn't seem to notice. "Minerva!" he called. She slowly spun to a stop, facing away from the headmaster, but used her feet to turn the chair around. "You're back?" she asked, scowling at him. "Of course I'm back," he snapped. "I am the headmaster of this school." Minerva stood up, placed her hands on the desk in front of her, and leaned toward him. Her eyes burned in anger, and her lips were curled back in a snarl. "Excuse me," he asked, confused and a little alarmed by her countenance. "Do you know how many times I've nearly been named headmistress of this school? When Fudge and his bumbling idiots took you into custody this time, I thought I finally had my chance. I was so close." He shook his head dumbly. I'm sorry, Minerva." He tilted his head slightly and wondered if he'd really just apologized for keeping his job. She pushed away from the desk and tripped over the chair behind her. Catching her balance, she turned to the chair and smiled. "Pardon me. I hope I didn't hurt you." She scooted by the chair, patting it lightly on the armrest. Turning to the door, she took a few steps, then stared at Dumbledore. "You're back?" she asked, acting as if she'd just noticed him. "Minerva, are you unwell?" he asked, taking a step toward her. "Unwell? No," she protested, waving a hand about airily, only to become distracted its movement. "Perhaps you should," Dumbledore began, only to be interrupted by a clock chiming on the mantel. Minerva spun to face the clock, then clapped gleefully. "Staff meeting time!" she crowed. She turned back to Dumbledore and smiled. "Would you like to come?" she asked shyly. "We're having brownies. I'm being naughty, of course. I just had a plateful, but they're so delicious." Albus rubbed his temples tiredly. "No, I think I'll leave it in your capable hands, my dear. I'll be sure to attend the next one." "Excellent. We'll see you tomorrow, then, tomorrow," he asked before she could exit the office. "If there's a staff meeting today, why would there be another tomorrow? We have staff meetings every day, Albus. After all, it's not as though we teachers have anything else to do this year," she told him cheerfully. Waving happily, she skipped out of the office and closed the door behind her. Moving to his desk, he sat down and stared at the door. "What has gotten into her?" he wondered. "First the students, then that business with the profit interview, then the ministry's treatment." He shuddered. No. Best not to think about that." He glanced around his office once. "A hot bath," he murmured. "Yes, a bath and a nice nap, I think." He stared at the sweet for a moment, then shrugged and picked it up. Making his way to the door of his private quarters, he bit into the brownie and nearly moaned. She was right, he thought. Staff lounge the next day. Albus smiled to himself and popped another lemon drop into his mouth before stepping into the room. He'd always claimed the lemon drops were calming, but this particular batch was extra mellow. He made a mental note to thank the second year who'd bought him the large tin of his favorite treat. His grin broadened when he saw his staff clustered around a side table, helping themselves to tea and what looked like a large platter of brownies. He looked around the room, nodding at the other professors. He was glad the staff had calmed down, and now believed that he hadn't been responsible for what the ministry had accused him of. "Albus, you must try one of these," Professor Sprout said, waving a brownie in each hand. He wondered if they were the same recipe as the one he'd tried yesterday. "I do believe I will," he murmured, walking over to the table. "Hufflepuff common room. Are those the same brownies that Hermione came up with?" asked Ernie Macmillan. The whole house was gathered in the common room, watching the staff meeting being projected on one wall. Susan Bones looked up from a bag of popcorn she held and shook her head. "No, these are slightly different. She wanted to make sure that Hagrid wouldn't have any problems with these, so she modified the recipe." She shook a generous amount of popcorn into the small bowl in her lap. Passing the huge bag of popcorn to Hannah, she grinned. "Remember, the old recipe had an adverse side effect on Hagrid, so that's why they moved the staff lounge and bricked up the entrance to the old one," asked Hannah. "I heard they couldn't get rid of the smell," added Ernie. "I also heard that they tried to exorcise the room. Why, I'm not sure, but it didn't work for obvious reasons. They should have tried Harry's suggestion," murmured a third year. "I mean, a switching spell to move the stink down to Snape's quarters is perfect. But then, he's brilliant anyway, isn't he? And those eyes," she said with a sigh and a slightly starry look in her eyes. Hannah and Susan exchanged a knowing glance. The third year wasn't the only girl in the school seriously crushing on Harry's bad boy image this year. He hadn't shown an interest in any particular girl yet, but that only aggravated the situation. Silence fell in both the staff room and the common room as the teachers took their positions around the table. "Author's notes,"